engagement in communication, and I'm actually wondering, perhaps it's a new discrete census.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Luke Haliburton from LMU Munich, and actually it's really great timing for the talk before about measuring what's going on with the audience, because we actually try to look at how to communicate that engagement from the audience to the presenter. Okay, so presentations, as we know, are common in many workplaces, especially right now in academia. And in a typical in-person presentation setting, a presenter can perceive information from the audience from a number of sort of non-verbal signals. So eye contact, nodding, fidgeting, sort of noise. You can get a clue about how your audience is responding to your presentation, and you can potentially adapt and react to this. But in hybrid meetings, this is not always so easy. So hybrid meetings, when some portion of the audience is virtual, it's becoming increasingly ubiquitous, and these virtual participants are often muted, sometimes have their camera off, or there's so many of them that they're not even displayed on the screen. And in larger hybrid presentations in particular, the ability to get nonverbal feedback from your audience is more and more difficult. And so we wanted to look at how can we actually communicate the sort of feeling of the audience to the presenter in an unobtrusive way. And so for that, we looked into thermal feedback for connecting presenters and their audience. And why thermal? Well, thermal feedback has been shown to be effective in communicating emotions. So generally warmth induces feelings of closeness, and cold induces feelings of separation or being alone. And past work in HCI has also used temperature to augment one-to-one communications, for example, using temperature to augment texts. And we then wanted to extend this to a group setting so that we can actually communicate, instead of one-to-one, we have n-to-one. And finally, thermal signals are also interesting for application because they are unobtrusive. It's not easy to detect when someone's receiving a temperature signal because you can't detect it from far away. And so based on this information, we asked the following research question to guide our study, which is, to what extent can thermal signals be used to communicate group affect to increase feelings of connectedness during presentations? Okay. So to answer this question, we conducted a lab-based mixed methods user study where participants were required to give presentations while wearing a thermal feedback device on their wrist. So to start with the kind of like overview of the experimental protocol, we had first a preparation phase because it's clear in previous work that it's important to personalize the direction and scale of thermal signals in order for them to be easily interpretable by users. So we actually had participants first tell us whether they associated engagement with warmth or cold, and then followed a procedure that's detailed in the paper, but it's based on previous work where they had to recall and correctly identify different signals, basically sample signals, to validate the signal. So we then assigned participants to a group and presentation topic order, which was counterbalanced because it was a within subject study. And participants then completed a first questionnaire and conducted a 3-minute pitch presentation based on a 1-page prompt, and then filled out another questionnaire. They then did a second presentation, again, different topic, 1-page prompt, and did a final questionnaire, and finally an exit interview. And all of the participants used the same 2 presentations in counterbalanced order and had 1 presentation with thermal feedback and 1 without. And so obviously it would be weird if you're just presenting to an empty room with thermal feedback, so we had other means of feedback that were actually constant across the conditions. So there was a kind of hybrid meeting setup. So the participant on the right wearing the bracelet gave a presentation to a hybrid room where there was 2 experimenters present as an in-person audience, and then there were 4 people in a Zoom call, 1 with camera off, and 3 others who reacted to the presentation. And we used an Ember Wave device to provide the thermal signal to the wrist. Okay, and so for how the audience actually reacted, we chose to go with a kind of controlled, pre-scripted route where we simulated different reaction levels. So we kind of created a script beforehand where people were first neutral for a while, then they went completely unengaged, then got engaged, and then followed this sort of timing. So the experimenters who were in the room had the timing and they responded according to it, so looking like they were interested or uninterested. And we had the people in the Zoom call, we pre-recorded the video so that they didn't have to be present for every single participant. And you can see kind of an example of how they would be really facing the screen or like typing on a second screen to sort of give that feeling of being engaged or unengaged. And similarly, we had the temperature signal from the thermal bracelet following the same timing. Okay, so with this, each participant actually experienced like the full range of engagement levels during their presentation. And we recruited 20 participants for this within subject study with these characteristics from 22 to 50 years, and 13 females, 7 males. and we'll take a look at a selection of the results given the time. So first, kind of validating the thermal metaphor. So during the preparation phase where participants had to construct their own personalized mapping, actually 90% of them agreed on the same metaphor, which is what we kind of expected from prior work, that engaged was warm, so that was when they felt connected, and unengaged was cold, where they felt unconnected. But it wasn't 100%, so obviously this personalization is actually kind of an important aspect. But we did find that all of the participants were able to have 100% recall during that recall preparation phase, which is good. So then looking into kind of the questionnaire results, so we found no significant increase in either workload or perceived stress when using the bracelet compared to not, so that's good. It didn't kind of add any extra load onto the participants. There was also high ratings for usability and user experience. But there's kind of some interesting results with whether it was actually unobtrusive. So some of the participants were able to incorporate the signal without feeling distracted. So saying things like, I noticed and I tried to adapt, it didn't bother me. But actually half of the participants mentioned at some point during the interview that it was, in some case, distracting. And looking a bit deeper into why this was distracting, it's a bit further explained when we look into the positive and negative feedback. So everyone experienced like unengaged and engaged audience. And for the negative feedback, basically every participant said that negative feedback was distracting. So they said, if I'm doing bad, then I don't need to have someone tell me that I'm doing bad. It's just demotivating, right? And that was because they didn't really know how they could adapt. But on the other hand, positive feedback, basically every participant said that it was encouraging. So it was calming. I knew that when it was warm, I was doing all right. And this was pretty constant across the participants. Okay, and then regarding that feeling of social connectedness that we're going after, there was a significant correlation between social connectedness and perceived presentation quality when using thermal feedback, which means that the participants felt connected when they did well, and they felt disconnected when they did bad, but only when they had that thermal signal. And this is also echoed in our interviews, where people mentioned, for example, thermal feedback did a great job in raising my awareness of the audience and also increases my connectedness to my audience. It's great when participants say exactly what you hope they say. But yeah, so this feeling of social connectedness was being inspired by the signal. Okay, so what does these results actually mean in practice? First, the thermal feedback can indeed communicate audience engagement, and it can help presenters feel more in tune with their audience without increasing workload or stress, but it has to be personalized. But with the caveat that positive feedback was encouraging and actually, induced social connectedness, but negative feedback is distracting. So we kind of make a recommendation that this should be used carefully, either for practice talks or times when you can actually incorporate that feedback without kind of crashing your talk, or it could be used by more expert presenters. We think there's a lot of potential for development here and incorporation with different sensing technologies, such as what we saw in the past talk. And for now, that brings me to the end of my talk, so thank you for listening. And
Okay, Gregory?
Hello, thank you very much for your speech. It was very enlightening. My question is based around the events that you went through, so the different types of meetings. So in terms of my own feedback of wearing a large watch, is that if I'm in a meeting where I'm having to take notes and typing away, that's something I usually just remove because it gets in the way. So that's sort of where this question comes from. So what sort of events were you having in these meetings?
yeah, so in this case, they were actually, presenting without having to type anything. So it was, I guess, the ideal sort of situation. But even like the version that we showed there's already been a new version of that device. It's like a commercially available device that is smaller. It's pretty similar size to a smartwatch. So I think given how popular and common smartwatches are now, it's about the size of an Apple Watch. So I think that it's something that could be pretty easily incorporated. You don't need a huge size to provide the signal. It's mostly a battery-based thing. So it is something that could be relatively usable in that case, I think. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. So the next speaker will be Riku. Is it working?